listening to Contesting Wrestling, a show about aggressively getting in your friends' faces and being like, why do you make the choices you make?
That is what wrestling is.
What's up with that? It is. It unfortunately, because I'm the anti-wrestling guy, I still wind up living my life in a way that is similar to the way wrestlers live their lives, just emotionally or
I
metaphorically.
think you already did that, but continue.
Yeah, I don't think you needed wrestling to do that.
I mean, yeah, I know all of the. You guys sound just like my therapist. It's really complicated. Anyway, now if you've been listening to the show for a while, you know that I've interrogated my co-hosts and longtime friends enough, really, about their thoughts and feelings about wrestling. I got it. I got the full breadth of it. It's time, sometimes, and now is one of those times, to talk to people who are different, other people who aren't normally on this podcast, who also wrestle, who sometimes make choices as a wrestler that fascinate me. Today's going to be one of those days, but first, my co-host, Benjamin Abelson.
I am Dr. Ben Abelson, professor of philosophy at Mercy College and lifelong fan of professional wrestling. And someone who will aggressively get up in Evan's face about his life choices, specifically the ones related to this podcast. And our co-hosts first.
It is me, referee Katie Villa. I am here to both contest wrestling and make poop jokes. Which of those is my main role? I've still yet to figure out. I have been a fan of wrestling since 2003, the single worst year to get into wrestling. And I've been in wrestling since 2014, reffing since 2017. And last but not least, our final co-host.
We got a full house tonight. Hello, everybody. My name, as usual, is Doc Diamondfire. I've been in wrestling about 13 years now. I need to get an actual start date and kind of declare one. In any case, I've done a little bit of everything. You know, I've done commentary, ring announcing. I've even wrestled a bit. And, we have a guest today. We have somebody who is currently teaching at a new school here in New York City, a school I've been around a little bit. I'm teaching a bit of history to the students there, and I'm having a real good time doing it. And our guest, without any further ado, is the King of Chaos, Logan Black. Hello, Logan. Welcome to Contesting Wrestling.
What is going on, guys? I'm sitting here. I've got a bit of beard envy, just like staring at everybody. I just, as much as I love wrestling just as you guys do, the one thing that I don't have in common is that I just can't grow facial hair like that. So I'm very envious of what I'm looking at the moment.
Well, if it's a consolation, the fact that I, a man who is involuntarily bald, and I'm now talking to you, a man who seems to be a bald by choice.
Oh no, I've got mohawk here,
a
brother.
BBC, as we refer to in the bald community.
He's got a
mohawk.
He's got the mohawk.
And then, but on either side of the mohawk is what we would conventionally refer to as baldness, and so that,
Well, that's a Psorites paradox.
I miss the ability to choose to.
So Logan, what you're saying is the goatee just grows in that way. Nothing else grows.
No, it's that's pretty much how it is. I've literally been growing this goatee since freshman year of high school because it's the only facial hair that actually comes in.
I suppose you take what you can get.
Exactly.
Easy for me to say.
Now, Logan, normally there's one question I ask every guest, and today I'm going to ask you kind of two questions in one, because you are, we've had a handful of wrestlers on, but you are the first guy, really think, who wrestles in a particular style, I would say, at least based on the match that we saw. So, the standard question I ask on Contesting Wrestling is, why do you think wrestling is worth one's time? Like, given all of the things anybody could spend their time doing and watching, why is wrestling something that they should go with? And then within that, why do you choose to do the sort of wrestling that when I watch a match of, it kind of makes me feel, I get sort of the same feeling I get watching like ISIS beheading videos sometimes. Like, not like I'm pounding a lot of those, but like, you know, look, I've been on the internet a long time. We've all seen some stuff. And
it's a form of
self-flagellation
for Evan. He has to do like a certain quota of beheadings every month.
We don't need to get into why. It's just a very complex legal situation I'm embroiled in. But yeah, so to take those two questions and please run with it.
So why is wrestling worth somebody's time from a fan perspective we're talking about?
From a fan perspective,
Yes.
from a wrestler's perspective, from your perspective.
All right, so like from a fan's perspective, because I've been a wrestling fan literally as far back as I can remember, literally like as a small, tiny child going to see, you know, Hulk Hogan at the Garden or like Ric Flair. And wrestling to me has just always been the most unique form of entertainment in existence. And I can look at it now with like this, you know, this, I guess, specific lens of somebody who's involved in wrestling, but it really is very much a unique form of entertainment. It is live action, superhero style theater in the round that allows for, I guess, you know, allows for participation from the crowd, which in all reality, like what other forms of entertainment really do that? I mean, stand-up comedy kind of does, but it doesn't really, because then you're heckling and you get shut down. There really is nothing quite like professional wrestling. And I think that, you know, after all these years is what brings me to it and makes me keep watching.
So it encourages a kind of expression, self-expression from the audience that other
absolutely, like it encourages people to go there and literally act out all of their aggressions. Literally, that's how wrestling drew money for like the entire history of it. People acting out their aggressions of like wanting to see the bad guy get beat up. They can't do that themselves, so they have to live vicariously through the babyface, so
and
to speak.
insert maybe a controlled way that wouldn't spill out over into the streets.
Well, the problem is that it often did back in the day spill out into the streets. Many wrestlers getting stabbed, shot, having acid thrown on them. In Puerto Rico, that still exists, where you can purchase cups of rocks or urine to throw at wrestlers.
Wait, hold, rewind. Urine?
If you listen to wrestlers tell stories,
Pee-pee.
yes, pee, as in you drink water and
Pee-pee, like straight up out of someone's pee.
I'd imagine.
Pee-pee.
I don't know where else they're getting. I mean, it is Puerto Rico. My grandparents had a farm on Puerto Rico. It could be animal piss. I don't know what they're doing.
It's from Carlos Colon himself.
It would still come out of a pee hole.
So that's also, again, like, you don't go to see Fast and Furious and throw rocks at the screen. You don't go to a Broadway show. You don't go to a Broadway show and boo, you know, Les Miserables, although maybe you should. I don't know.
If you cough once at the wrong time on a Broadway show, the production stops and everyone in the building shames you out of it.
Right. So, like, there's nothing quite like pro wrestling. And I think, again, that's what keeps me as a fan of it to this day. As somebody who's involved in wrestling, I'm sure this is an answer you guys have gotten fairly often or that you've at least heard, but it really is like a drug. There's a high to it. You show up and it's just, when you walk out of that curtain, when the adrenaline hits, when, you know, crowd is, you know, cheering for you, booing for you, it really is like a high. And like, I could be in like immense pain. I often am. I've been doing this for over a decade.
You're never
right.
not.
Like, Katie has seen the way that I walk. I walk with a limp because everything on me is messed up. But
you walk hunched over with a limp. Yes.
So like, I could have that, but again, once the music hits, once like the gear is on and I'm ready and I pop out that curtain, it's done. I don't feel anything. Everything is perfectly fine. And like, I'm chasing the dragon. You know what I mean? It really is like, I've never touched a drug in my life. Wrestling literally is my only drug. And if we're going to the final part of that question, which is what attracts me to like deathmatch and hardcore wrestling, a couple of factors have drawn me in. One, I was always a fan of it growing up. So, you know, being part of it is kind of me living out that childhood dream. The other one is that I'm good at it. I think Mick Foley once said, like, I don't enjoy pain, but I'm very good at absorbing it. And that's kind of how that works for me. Like, it's not that I enjoy it, but like, I'm good at doing this style and, you know, going as, you know, making poor choices with my body is something that I think I've been able to monetize for a very long time, and that's how that works for me.
And I would imagine that the adrenaline has to play into that, right? Because like watching your match, like there's no way you must be in something of an altered state, right? Because like if you're a person in possession of their full conscious faculties is not going to be like, all right, it's time for me to flip onto the tax, you know.
He's not.
And so no, but that's the thing. It's like it reminds me as much as I'm like, you know, talking about hardcore wrestling making me feel like I'm watching ISIS beheading videos, I also, you know, very much have to admit like it reminds me sort of like, I don't know, like watching like monks who like achieve an ecstatic state and like, you know, like pierce themselves with like stuff like that, where it seems like you're clearly having a great time. Yeah, when the sporks came out, that was fantastic. That was truly, I laughed my fucking balls off at that.
And the best part of the
They were in,
sports
like, a
spot
piece of
is
foam.
Cannonball. You know, you set them up the wrong way with the sporks up, and then you're like, oh, I was supposed to do it the other way. Okay, and you put them down, and then while your back is turned and you're about to do the Vader bomb, Cannonball is onto you and flips them back up so that you end up taking them. And I thought that was comedically brilliant.
Yeah, I think that was the point of what we were doing. Like in my head, I'm like, all right, we've got him. We're doing something cool. Let me do this to give myself more time to have him turn the tables on me, because if I'm kicking his ass and he's just able to like do whatever the hell he wants, how much of an ass kicker am I? You know, your basic wrestling psychology 101 that often gets thrown out the window once like all the plunder comes into play.
So since we didn't explicitly say the match we're talking about that was sent to us by Logan Black is Jeff Cannonball versus Logan Black from H2O Wrestling, Subterranean Violence number 3, I believe. And what was the stipulation on it exactly again?
It was thumbtacks, bottle caps, sliced open Coke cans and beer cans. And there may have been, I think that was it, because like the tacks were on like, you know, bats, and there were lots of other tacks and the bottle caps and all the other stuff like that.
No, the thing that I enjoyed about this match, you know, that was a little different than, you know, some super serious death matches, that you two got in the ring and it seemed like you were friendly, and you looked at each other, and it felt to me watching that like you had to make an agreement. We need to make each other angry in order to do violence. And then you proceeded to do that.
No, so like for me, I think the thing I love about deathmatch wrestling, like being part of it, is that it's no bullshit. Everybody in deathmatch wrestling is exactly who they say that they are, even though we're all playing, you know, characters and all that. But it's all legit. So like, you know, you can't give the people less than anything. So Jeff and I walking in there, I can't go in and get right in his face and be, you know, like a bully like I normally am to other people, because everybody who was there that day knew, like, hey, you know, we know Jeff Cannonball. We're, you know, he's like pretty much a god within this building. But like, we've also seen that Jeff hangs out with Logan. And, you know, I was at Jeff's wedding, and I've barbecued at Jeff's house. Like, people know this kind of stuff. So it would be an insult for me to be inauthentic to these fans. And immediately when you're inauthentic to them, that's it. Deathmatch fans cannot care less about you. But if you give them your all and you put it out there, man, like the last time I was at the H2O building, I was doing like, it was like a nonsense match. It wasn't like any, you know, death match, no hardcore, nothing. But like I had, you know, fans giving me stuff, and like I've had, you know, fans buy me cupcakes or like, anything. Those fans are super dedicated. And I think, again, it's just the authenticity, and they can see past everything. And I want to say to what Evan was saying before about like the appeal of deathmatch wrestling and who it is to fans. You might think of it like, you know, you say the ISIS beheadings. I grew up in Coney Island. To me, deathmatch wrestling is the freak show on the boardwalk. That is the appeal of this. Where like,
well, and I do think that like something that I felt was different watching your match that I've seen in maybe a little bit of the deathmatch wrestling that we've covered is like there is still because there are these kind of moments of levity, like with the sporks or whatever, or these moments where you guys kind of seem to like stop and like acknowledge how ridiculous this is, or when you know, or even at the end, just when you're like much more amicable towards each other. Like I feel like a lot of deathmatch wrestling we watch, you know, it's more that it just it kind of, the heaviness sort of builds throughout the match. You know, you're watching to like, because sometimes it's the freak show, right? But then sometimes it feels like you're just watching two guys hurt each other, you know, in a way that, because there are times when deathmatch stuff can seem to like turn in, or at least it feels like it is simulating like a real knockdown, drag out, like nasty fight in a way that I'm trying to think of how to articulate what I'm trying to. I guess what I'm saying is that deathmatch wrestling seems to often exist
gratuitous violence
in this kind of middle ground where it is somewhere between entertainment and really like, oh god, like I'm watching something bad happen here. And I was struck by how you guys. Yeah, exactly. I was struck by how you guys did seem to. You were able to keep that heaviness from building up to the point where it tipped into that depressive state for me.
Well, I know, and I think that just also comes down to like the authentic nature of this. Again, if I got in there with somebody else, that would have been a different match. But because it was Jeff, that's how he had to do it. Again, all the stuff that you're mentioning within the context of deathmatch wrestling makes sense. Like somebody like a Nick Gage is not going to go in there. He doesn't have friends in professional wrestling. You know what I mean? Like that is what goes down. Or like Schlack or you know, Adkis or like any of these other deathmatch guys. They're just there to hurt people. And that is the authenticity of what people are seeing. So that's why it gets into like almost that uncomfortable place. Although, to be brutally honest, I really do like that uncomfortable place. I really like getting that reaction out of people, because that is incredibly hard to bring out of not just wrestling fans who have seen everything, but also to deathmatch fans. If I can make them cringe, that's it. Like I got it, and I have.
I was gonna say, along the lines with the authenticity, to me, what it reminds me of is the hardcore punk scene.
Oh yeah.
And for one thing, like the sort of the lack of a distinction between who's on stage and who's in the crowd to some extent. Like the people on stage are really just sort of like the epitome of the lifestyle that everyone's kind of living. But then also you get someone like Gigi Allen, right, where what he was doing was pushing those same boundaries and trying to get these legitimate reactions out of people, because what he was doing was fucking legitimate, you know. Legitimate,
right? And again, I came from the punk and hardcore scene, so like that's very much my entire credo of everything. You know, to make these matches and the shows that I'm on, every match that I'm in, I want it to have the same feeling, like when I would step into the center of a crowd and a band just starts up and it's just like, all right, it's time for violence. There we go. Now I'm pardoned. I want that. I want the people in the crowd, whether they're interested in punk rock or not, to have those same feelings that I had.
Well, I think the feelings are universal, even if maybe the style or the music is not. People will get it, you know, out of themselves in different ways. So it's totally valid to try and translate it to different audiences and try to get them to come along with you. Sometimes it makes them uncomfortable, and sometimes at the end of that experience, they're happy that they got a little uncomfortable.
Gets to something we've talked about before is like the difference between people who come to entertainment for escape and people who come to entertainment for catharsis, right? Where it's like, you know, sometimes you're like, oh, like I'm filled with rage. I need to listen to music that is also filled with rage to help me feel this rage, to help communicate it. And then sometimes you're like, I'm filled with rage, and you try to listen to some music that's really angry, and you're like, I don't want to see this reflection. This is horrible. I need to go listen to something that will chill. That's chill. Like as my wife and I try to figure out TV shows to watch. You know, I'm like, oh, let's watch like this serious drama about the human condition, and she's like, well, how about we fucking don't do that because we already live it. So I would like to watch this cartoon instead, and I can't really make an argument against that, right? And so I guess it's kind of interesting. Like because I 100% get everything that you're saying about deathmatch wrestling, and when I watch it, I see people like executing things that they love and clearly feel passionate about, and I feel that connection. And I guess my reaction, honestly, is just I'm like, oh, like I already feel beset enough by the darkness in the world where sometimes
could be
deathmatch
both.
wrestling it's a step too far for me. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a wuss. Maybe that's what it is.
No, I don't think that makes you a wuss at all. I mean, no, there's plenty, and again, like that's again why wrestling in general, not just deathmatch wrestling, but wrestling to me is the freak show. If you don't like the sword swallower, you can watch the girl dance with the snake. If you're not there for the girl to dance with the snake, you can watch the guy who's juggling swords or axes or whatever. If you're not into that, you got the guy who with the tiny little arms learning, playing drums for you. Like there's something for everybody, and you're gonna get that all in like the multi-act play or show that is the freak show / professional wrestling.
Yeah. It's got that vaudeville style, like, it's a little bit everything. You'll laugh, you'll cry, there's a comedian, yeah.
You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll shit yourself.
It was kind of
just a bit.
developed alongside vaudeville, in this country when it first started becoming very popular. I mean, there's always been some form of wrestling around. Ben, you recently shared on social media an article from an archaeology website where, they were, and the article is from about 5 or 6 years ago. They unearthed something from ancient Egypt, like a papyrus. That was a contract between some people saying that one wrestler will be thrown 3 times and then submit in this match for a certain payment. And if they double cross the other guy, they would owe a much more money. So wrestling has been what it's been.
And that was Ric Flair's first wrestling.
Oh.
Against Terry Funk.
Right. So we'll get to that in a second. I have one more question about training. So Logan, you're a trainer at the T2T Wrestling Academy, run by our friend Tom Fraser.
He was on the podcast very early in the podcast's existence.
And so I'm wondering, so besides like the wrestling basics of rolls and bumps and things like that, do you teach specifically hardcore and deathmatch wrestling?
So no, I definitely don't go into that. I think hardcore and deathmatch wrestling is something that people should jump into once they are completely trained, fully trained, can go out there and have, matches at, different lengths. And then they decide, okay, let me go for this. I think if you, and this is not to say like,
is there something to be trained there?
So
or is it something you just kind of have to figure out?
So I think that there's definitely a certain psychology to that, but you can't. A lot of stuff in wrestling you cannot teach without getting your reps in. You know what I mean? Like, and that's just in general. Like, I could sit there and like talk about wrestling psychology, day in day out with people, but unless they're going out there and actually applying it in the ring in front of crowds, it's not going to stick, and it's also not going to make sense. And this is no different with like deathmatch wrestling. But again, if somebody could teach you how to do every move and have like, this like perfect Dragon Gate style match, but unless you know how to apply the psychology within the context of a match, none of that's going to matter.
That makes sense, because you really can't learn to ref without just reffing.
Exactly.
Yeah, and like there's no way to sit down and teach someone to ref and for it to be like a
and I'll say that like while I am I love doing hardcore, I love doing deathmatch stuff. Anybody who has wrestled me outside of that can tell you that I can definitely hold my own when it comes to a lot of other things. If I want to sit there and I want to wrestle for 10 minutes straight on the mat, I could do that. I know, your basic lucha. I could do a lot of different stuff. The thing about hardcore and deathmatch, not just that I like it, but the fact is that there aren't a lot of people who do that. And there are not a lot of people who brawl on wrestling cards. Everybody's trying to get in, the coolest wrist lock and the coolest move. It's like, well, I'm going to stand out by going into the crowd and dumping you on your head. That's going to work for me. That's what's going to make me stand out. And that's what's going to give me a line at my merch table. And it's, again, it has been quite successful for me so far.
So should we get into the matches that we watched this week?
Yeah, so speaking of this kind of variety show thing, so the first match, before we get into the first match that we watched, the genesis for that match was at Wrestle War 1989. Ric Flair had just defeated Ricky Steamboat for his 6th World Heavyweight title. And Flair and Steamboat, and I've been wanting to watch this Terry Funk Ric Flair match for the podcast for a long time. We still haven't watched a Flair Steamboat match. I don't know if we'll get to it with Evan, but Flair and Steamboat are known for.
We watched Steamboat and somebody.
We watched
Savage.
Steamboat and
Savage,
yeah.
Randy
right.
Savage. So Flair and Steamboat are known for their just impeccable athletic wrestling contests, and I think this Wrestle War match between them was one of those. And it's just such a great contrast between that and then Ric Flair wins and they shake hands and they're sportsmen, and then fucking Terry Funk, who was one of the judges, comes out.
Who was already retired at least once by this point.
More than that.
Right. And demands a title shot. Flair doesn't want to give it to him because Funk has been in Hollywood for the past 5 years, filming, I had to look it up, Paradise Alley with Sylvester Stallone.
Does Terry Funk have the ability to not look haggard and tired?
Even in that tuxedo.
It's funny how, because a lot of wrestlers, they come out and they look really strong, and then by the end of the match, they look dead. Terry Funk looks like he's at the end of a long, brutal match at all times. Like, that's the thing. Like, he comes out, he looks like that. 15 minutes, he looks like that. An hour later, he looks exactly the same. Is he tired? Is he not tired? Who knows? It doesn't fucking matter.
Evan, I'll put it to you this way. This match here, where he's the guy who's trying to come back for his, last title match, that was in, 1989. He started wrestling well over 20 years before that, so he did look a little less haggard in the 60s. Oh, and for the record, the other match we watched was 10 years after this.
Right, the other match we watched was well after Beyond the Mat, which you saw, Evan, in which Funk retires again.
I do like how, at least in this initial bit, he's like, they start off being very polite to each other. It's like almost like it's borderline Canadian style, just like, oh, I'd like to challenge you to a wrestling match because I think I'd be better at wrestling than you. Oh, well, I don't know about that. Oh, and then
I got contenders
and then just
right
the unmitigated psychotic
he,
violence.
Funk delivers by far the most brutal pile driver he has ever done, because most of his pile drivers don't look that brutal. They look very safe, but this one, I think maybe he expected the table to break and it just didn't.
All the pile drivers that we see on this episode scared me and made me
rough,
poop myself just
well.
a little. Every single one.
Yeah,
no, that one was
you
especially
didn't see too many table spots in America in 1989.
No.
Was this particularly brutal for 1989?
Yes.
All this, I was going to say, it
Yes.
seems unusually...
Terry Funk,
This was
I've
not
compared him
normal
before
for the
to
time.
Bob Dylan, where, he was kind of the normal folk wrestler, and then he went electric. And by electric, I mean hardcore, and then innovated the hardcore style for years to come. He was one of the progenitors of ECW. Anyway, Logan, why don't you tell us why you chose this match between Flair and Funk from Clash of the Champions 9 on November 15th, 1989, the famous I Quit match for the World Heavyweight title?
So, full disclosure, the original match that I had told Doc I wanted to pick for this was Funk and Sabu from Born to Be Wired and ECW, which to me is just a brilliant, brilliant match. Just showcases how brutal and crazy Terry Funk is. But you guys had already gone through that one on the show. So I thought, again, to me, my whole thing, and, we're going to go full circle here and talking about authenticity in that Terry Funk, whether he is or isn't, he made you believe that he is crazy. And I think that this match was one of the better showcases of how legitimately insane Terry Funk is. That and the fact that it's just an excellent wrestling match with on point psychology. Very brutal for 1989.
Yeah, Ric Flair had been, the top wrestler in the world for 10 years maybe, and most of his NWA title defenses, at least the ones that like made it on video and televised, were not, ridiculous brawls. He had just gotten done with his series with Ricky Steamboat, these like 45 to 55 minute technical masterpieces. If he was going to brawl, he was going to brawl with like Ronnie Garvin or, something like that. Not a guy like Terry Funk. What were you going to say, Katie?
Oh, I said those were some of the best matches of Flair's career.
Yeah.
The ones we had with Steamboat.
At one point, so I guess Terry Funk is from a wrestling family, because at one point one of the announcers says that the spinning toe hold is a patent of the Funk family. And I was just thinking about how weird it would be to come from a family with its own signature wrestling moves.
Yeah, like, you got to recognize that, going back into like the 50s, and prior and all that kind of, even like well into the 80s, there was like a list of wrestling moves. Like you could probably get like a short paper with listing wrestling moves. So when you, well,
not
certainly,
anymore.
but at that point it was like there wasn't much. So if you had something different, which the spinning toe hold was different, that was like very much your own, and no one else could touch that. And that was Dory Funk Sr.'s move, passed down to Dory Funk Jr. and Terry Funk, his kids.
What I love about something like the spinning toe hold is because of its history, it has this power in the eyes of wrestling fans. So you have Terry Funk, especially in his death matches in Japan, like they'll be doing all this fucking exploding C4 shit and barbed wire, and then for the finish, he'll put the guy in the spinning toe hold, and everyone buys
the crowd
it.
goes, whoa!
It's the same thing with a move like the figure four, is that it was put over so hard by countless people in the 80s that going into now, where you literally have to pull out a shotgun and blow somebody's head off in order to get a 3 count. Usually they'll kick out by 2.9 at that point, but the figure four is a finish. You can still get that over. That's how deep that goes in like the lore of wrestling.
In this match, the crowd pops huge when Flair goes to the leg for the first time, because they know it's a prelude to the
That's your wrestling psychology. I mean, they go outside, they're punching, they're brawling, they're doing all this nonsense on the outside with, like violence. But again, all it takes to get the crowd back on their feet is, the guy who's going to finish Funk off with a leg move going to the leg.
Yeah.
It does seem...
Evan, you go.
It does seem irresponsible to give him the microphone when he asks for the microphone.
About the microphone, by the way, Jim Ross and Gordon Solie are going on and on about this wireless microphone. And then when they pull it out, it clearly has a wire.
That's professional wrestling.
It's an illusion.
Brother.
That's special effects, guys.
That's how it goes. That's how... that's how somebody will work a leg the whole match and then put on the figure four. When if you're in the schoolyard putting the figure four on each other, you realize it hurts the other leg, but you just have to accept it. I always pop when I see somebody switch legs to do the toe hold to go into the figure four, because it's the straight leg that gets the pain put on it, not the bent leg, because you're bending it the wrong way at the knee. Don't actually put each other in the figure four, although I know me saying that isn't going to stop you.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing with like a move like the Boston Crab, where like it doesn't work your knee as much as everyone sets it off. Like that'll destroy your lower back. But nobody sells the lower back on a Boston Crab. Everyone sells the knee. And it's just become accepted because that's, wrestling is what it is.
And the half crab is a much more legit move. You can
Right.
really sink that in a lot better than you can trying to control somebody by both of their legs.
Are there a lot of examples that you can think of anybody getting somebody else in the Boston Crab in like a real fight, or like even MMA or something like that? Or do you really need somebody else to help?
Well, no,
you like
actually, like a couple of years back, it went viral. There was a video of a guy who locked in a Boston Crab in an MMA fight, and it went like ultra viral, and every like old school wrestler out there was like, see, I told you.
Right.
It was great.
The sharpshooter, no. Sharpshooter
Not
isn't going
quite.
to happen.
No, you got to stand there and be like, oh no, don't put me in the sharpshooter the whole time it's happening, and then you're in the sharpshooter.
Because I will say, as much as this podcast has not necessarily turned me into a wrestling fan, It has, you know, for example, if there's somebody being like an aggressive dick about like, him not wearing a mask, right? If somebody's like out there, like, calling people a sheep or whatever for wearing masks or something like that. And I imagine beating that guy on the train in front of everybody. Now I do imagine like putting a guy in the Boston Crab or something like that. Now there's more of a wrestling flavor to my vengeance fantasies in a way.
Putting him in the I imagine putting him in the Boston Crab until he can't walk anymore, and then kicking him in the face.
Yeah.
I've noticed that movie fight scenes have adopted more and more wrestling moves over the years.
Or has wrestling adopted more and more
Maybe
fight
a bit
scenes?
of
Which
both,
came first,
yeah.
the chicken or the egg? Yeah, no, I think
Definitely wrestling.
I mean, you want to give that credit. I think wrestling to me has always been quite derivative of the culture surrounding it, and I think a lot of what we're watching, especially right now, going all these years ahead of 1989, we're literally watching people go to games like Tekken or action movies and go like, yeah, let's bite this scene, let's bite this move, let's bite this thing that we see. Like, how many people did I see at my school last week pulling up stuff from the Mortal Kombat movie and go, how could I make this into a wrestling move? That's legit, because I think that's where we are right now. But again, 1989, there's a short list of wrestling moves, and
they do very few of them in this match, which is fine.
It's indicative of a positive movement within the wrestling culture, that the people getting into wrestling are looking to the pop culture around them for inspiration, because wrestling is the most successful when it mirrors the culture around it, as opposed to the style maybe 20 years ago when almost 20 years ago when I started getting into watching indie wrestling, and I love this stuff, but they weren't looking at pop culture around them. They were looking at Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko in ECW. And that stuff was great, but nobody watched that. Some people watched it on the DVD after the WWE sold it to them. But millions of people didn't watch it in movie theaters the way that you'd watch a real movie.
And the more that wrestling just referenced other wrestling, the more it became detached from the average person who wants to watch a good fight. And I think that wrestling lost a lot of its like casual fan base because of that.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons I wanted to start teaching wrestling history to wrestling students is that I started seeing it be expected that you knew everything that happened in wrestling just over the past 15, 20 years. And that's too much to ask.
It happened to me. It happened to me back in Chikara when I was training in Chikara. Certain teachers, and I'm not going to name names, and it's not their
fault. These were otherwise good teachers in a lot of cases.
That's just what was expected around them. Yeah, these were otherwise good teachers. This is not a knock on any specific teacher. We're shocked that I didn't just know like all of wrestling history like the back of my hand, and the specific names of every single move. Things like that.
Yeah, from the Attitude Era, which was, 17 years previous at that point, and you get people coming to school aged 18, 19, 20, 22, 23. They didn't watch, Austin 316. They didn't watch the NWO.
They weren't alive.
Exactly. That's the point, For most of them, for some of them, the entire time they've been watching wrestling, which for 6 or 7 years, Roman Reigns has been on top. Not even John Cena, but Roman Reigns. It's perspective,
They think Johnny Gargano is the best wrestler of all time.
I'm not touching that right now.
They can. No, they can. From their perspective,
but that's
why
also
wouldn't
the
he?
thing. But
Sure.
even at the same time, even if they've studied all wrestling throughout all of history, they could still feel that, because that's, again, full circle here. Wrestling is that art form where you can kind of pick what it is that you like. Like, how many people out there can say that the Ramones are the greatest band of all time, even though they might not be the best technical band, or they might not write the songs that you like? Art is like that. And I think that's another reason why, again, full circle, I like wrestling, as much as I do, because, man, it is just so vast and crazy. I could sit here and like go nuts over a 1989 Terry Funk match with like no real wrestling moves in it, and the person, a couple blocks away could be watching Johnny Gargano and go this is the
Evan,
best thing ever.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but if you are a human being and you see Terry Funk doing his thing, and Logan, as you pointed out, like, he's just really good at convincing you that he's fucking crazy. Like when he's swinging at the fans, almost falling over the guardrail because they're giving him shit.
Right, you've got to match Terry Funk's energy, or else you're never gonna get over. You have to match that chaos and that energy if you're ever expecting to have like a good match with Terry Funk. If you're gonna go out there and just try and do wrist locks with him while he's swinging at fans, no one's watching you.
Sometimes you just got to put on a baseball uniform and get the absolute shit.
We'll get to that very shortly.
I want to get to that because that was my favorite thing when I watched this week.
I was going to say, that's really one of the main strengths of Ric Flair. He always knew, from young to old, he always knew how to match the energy of who he was in the ring with. It's one of the reasons why he was ideal to be the NWA champion when they first gave it to him, back when the job was go to all the different territories and wrestle with all the different top guys and put them all over without losing to them. It's a very specific skill, and you have to be able to match the person in the ring with you. And at this point, Flair was very good at it. I'm sure after wrestling Steamboat all those times, he was happy to be able to go a little wild for a minute, bring out that part of him. And he was a babyface. You rarely see babyface Flair, but he had been on top for so long that the people just started to really like him, which happens. They needed a bigger babyface to turn him heel, and eventually Sting came along.
And so he wins the match with the figure 4, which is actually kind of rare, given that it was his signature hold.
Yeah. I had the same thought. I'm like, he never
Funk
wins
does a
with the
great
figure
job
4.
of just selling the agony of it, and then he finally says very clearly, which we don't always get in I Quit matches, "Yes, I quit." And I just want to
my leg, it's breaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, at one point he's like, "My leg is breaking," and
I want to try to relate to Evan,
leg.
right? Like my eye. We watched the Jerry Lawler empty arena match.
That's another favorite of mine.
Like, I want to try to relate to Evan how big of a fucking deal it is for a guy like Terry Funk to straight up say "I quit" and clearly, explicitly submit in a match of this magnitude. Especially the character that he was. Like, he's not the kind of guy who's ever really, who's ever going to quit. I mean, I guess he submitted to Jerry Lawler that time as well, but that was years before. Yeah.
I mean, it seems like he can't quit in the sense that what he's doing in the ring is also pretty much just what he's doing out in the street normally, and he just happens to occasionally wander into a ring and get paid to do it.
This is before MMA, where now in the culture we have the tap out, where it's okay, you tap out before you break an arm, and there's an honor to it. Back in 1989, once again, most of America, when they thought of a fight, they only thought of boxing. So you either got knocked out completely, or you lost by decision after the time limit ran out. But nobody ended a boxing match by saying, "I guess I'll just give up." So if somebody gave up, it was a big shocking thing.
Oh yeah, no movie had a realistic fight scene until Jim Cotta.
True classic of our time.
Now I'm curious now. I got to see this.
I want to get one of those.
I missed that.
I'll show you a trailer later,
sorry.
Katie. We need to get one of those combat pommel horses.
Okay.
Damn it! I was hoping that would land with more of you. Damn it! Oh, okay. Well, some listener is like, yes, Evan is a genius.
I thought it was a great reference.
Thank
Jim
you.
Cotta, Gymkata. Go to Google. Don't stop listening to the podcast, but on another device. Go to Google and check it out. Right, so we can move on now if you want.
But well, yeah. So I mean, this match seems it seems like he's being very mean because he just storms in to the bathroom.
Well, so wait, this is Terry Funk versus Screaming Norman Smiley from WCW Spring Stampede 2000. Funk is 56 years old at this point for the WCW Hardcore title. And we've just seen Hulk Hogan get arrested at gunpoint in the scene immediately
I think all the
before
wrestling
this.
fans who are here and on the show, and everyone listening in, legitimately, Hulk Hogan arrested at gunpoint is the most WCW statement of the year 2000 I think that I could think of.
Very
Exactly.
Russo-rific.
Bro, you're gonna get arrested.
So we're still in the hallway, and Terry Taylor tells Terry Funk that Norman Smiley is waiting for him in catering. And then Evan, continue with your description of what happens
because he like goes
next.
on the hunt for this guy, finds him in a bathroom. The guy's in there making normal bathroom sounds, right? Clearly.
Right, screaming at the top of his lungs.
I love the moment before he even gets to the bathroom where he gets into catering, asks them all where Norman Smiley is, and they all just completely rat Norman Smiley out as a unit and point to the bathroom. This whole match is brilliant. It's 4.5 stars, and I took 1/2 star off for reasons we'll discuss later.
It really makes you realize how little screaming is normally present in wrestling, right? Because like he's reacting much the way I would be reacting if Terry Funk came into the bathroom while I was in there doing my normal poop screams, and like this like aggressive homeless man started roughing me up. Like
somehow wearing a catcher's
uniform. I don't care for baseball, but I do like to put on a full baseball uniform when I take shits in public.
Okay. So to the baseball thing, if I recall and remember, me and Doc watched through all of WCW from this era and around it a couple years ago. The joke is he's actually scared of holding the title, right? Like he doesn't want to do hardcore.
He's not
matches.
A hardcore guy.
Yeah, he's not a hard. Norman Smiley is amazing, by the way. He's not a hardcore guy, and he's basically wearing the protective gear.
Evan, you've seen Norman Smiley once before, but I'm sure you blocked it out. It was that really long boring match with Vampiro.
Oh yeah, it's
that I regretted.
Yeah, I lied to you about how much of that I watched.
Of all the things,
so
that's
I'm glad
fine.
that's
okay.
Yes. This embraces way better the things that are amazing about Norman Smiley.
I mean, I thought this was a fun was a fun time. Went on a bit, but it was. I mean, yeah.
Funk empties an entire cabinet of soda on him, and then they're fighting in the kitchen, and my favorite part is Funk just blindly
there's a line from one of the announcers that's fantastic where Funk hits him with a cookie sheet, and you hear the announcer go, "That's not just any cookie sheet. That's an industrial-sized cookie sheet with a lot more torque to it."
Tony Schiavone, so underrated.
I remember I noted that line as well.
Late stage WCW was a hot mess.
What I've always said is 2000 WCW is an imploding neutron star. 2001 WCW is what's on the other side of that. Like, there's nothing left, and it's trying to regroup, but it's too mashed up and mutilated.
Watching this match and the Hogan segment just previous to it made me want to watch the entire pay-per-view. This is pretty entertaining
fucking shit. I have a continuity gripe. At some point, he gets thrown into that case of sodas, and they say, "Oh no, not the Diet Coke." But you can clearly see that most of those cans were regular Coke, and I truly hope someone got fired for that.
Tony Schiavone was an idiot.
I truly... Let me finish my...
He regularly called tables, chairs, and vice versa.
Let me finish my Simpson reference. I was saying, gee, I hope someone got fired for that blunder.
Until everybody was a year later.
I do...
Yeah, exactly.
I also need to point out that if you are hitting somebody with a cookie sheet, the larger the cookie sheet, actually the much less torque it's going to have, because you're going to get a lot more air resistance as you're striking somebody with it. So it's none of this
also
works.
Will have more give,
None
of
too.
this.
Yeah, it's except it all worked somehow. You put it all together and it worked amazing.
I love Terry Funk getting hit with the cookie sheet multiple times. One time no selling it, and then the next time like super drunk selling.
Ow! That one was fun.
You never know what you're gonna get out of Terry Funk.
That's the thing about Terry that. Here's the thing. I picked this one. I was like, late stage WCW, it's a hardcore division. It sucks. I've seen this match. It's gonna be kind of crappy. But in rewatching, I'm like, this. Anytime he got in the ring with Norman Smiley, I thought it was brilliant. Just because.
No, this was the greatest.
Right.
This was the greatest match of all time.
This to me is like, I don't want to say a guilty pleasure because I love everything Terry Funk does, but like it just goes to show that like you could have this hardcore division, you could have all these guys on the roster just trying to like beat each other and be brutal and be like, I'm the tough guy. And then here comes Terry Funk, who is the tough guy, just do comedy. Like, this is not a hardcore brawl.
This is slapstick.
This is a comedy wrestling match. Yeah.
He does take some pretty brutal chair shots directly to the head, though. There's one in the ring that was
certainly, but the Three Stooges were routinely injured doing their slapstick comedy. So that's what I would reference this to being. Is that this match was as Three Stooges as it gets, and like this to me is something that I would love to do more often in wrestling, if not anything more than to just piss off wrestling fans.
Depends on the fans, but yeah.
Yo, no, you gotta love Norman Smiley hanging from the piping of the ceiling, getting hit with a chair, and then falling through the table. You're like, yes, absolutely.
And let's be honest, screams inherently humorous.
Yes.
Every scream was a little funnier than the previous scream.
I think my favorite part of the match is when they finally make it to the ring and Norman has the upper hand, so of course he's going to get in the big wiggle, which was, you know, the spank that he was doing to everybody, which in 1999 to 2000, that was one of the most over things that WCW had like ever seen. That was so over. And he starts doing the big wiggle, and all Funk does is just grab the chair and like throw it over his own head and smash what looked to be very dangerously smashes Norman right in the head. It's just so brilliant because it's like Terry Funk does not have.
This
time
is very much
nonsense,
the age where people were sticking their head out for the chair shots, so everybody could see how real the chair shots were. This is before like any major leagues had any like restrictions based on concussions or anything like that. Yeah, if you watch Beyond the Mat, that was this was the year before rather, and you see, you know, The Rock beating Mick Foley in the face with that steel chair a dozen times, and like. It's a lot more cringeworthy to see now because of how much, and you know, people will say like, oh, it's because we know better now. No, bullshit. There's been more studies done. We've always known that beaning people in the head might not be a great idea. We're a lot more sensitive to it now.
Right.
I'm pretty sure we worked that out. I'm pretty sure we worked that out fairly early in human history. That's just like, oh, wow, like...
Right, but wrestling's always been that kind of nonsense. I remember hearing Danny Doring tell stories about how at the end of ECW, Balls Mahoney used to zip tie the chairs shut. Because, you know, again, when you hit someone over the head with the chair opens to kind of absorb the blow. But he zip tied these chairs shut. Because he goes, you know, if the fans in the front row see that it's zip tied, they'll know that it's more legit. And it's like, what are we doing here? But this is the kind of thoughts behind wrestling and how wrestlers think of just, I have to make it as real as humanly possible. I'm guilty of that shit too, but like certainly not in the way of like, I'm going to make somebody forget math.
There's a time and a place, and there's a strategy to it, and there's skill.
I've
and
always...
there are definitely times and places to refuse to do it. I remember hearing way back when I was training with Johnny Rod's Gleason's gym, place you've fairly familiar with, that like somebody was asked to do a blade job on one of the student shows and they refused, and you know, Johnny was not pleased. He's like, when they ask you to do that, you know, you gotta do that. It's like, maybe, you know, when they ask you to do that like for money, if you want to do that also, then you do, not for Yeah, like don't.
I wouldn't blade on.
If you really wanted to, by all means, do it. You know, on the first show that I ever was in front of the fans at, I was actually a referee for about 2 shows, which is a good way to get your feet wet. You know, Timmy Arson was there, and he did it, and yeah, he was very nice to me. He got what I brought to the table. I always appreciate people that understand me. Anyway, that's my own issues. I remember being back in the locker room, and they were like, "All right, Timmy, we want you to do some promos." And he was like, "Oh man," because he had already wiped all the blood kind of off of his face. And he's like, "Well, I'll do it again." And he starts looking for his blade, and then he goes, "Oh no, I think I dropped the blade in the ring." And I'm like, "Oh no." Yeah, well, he's just like, and he
I
looks
know
at
this
me,
story.
just
You told me
can
this
you go
story.
out
It's
there and
good.
find my blade? And what am I gonna say? I'm like, I'll try. You know, I eventually find the senior referee, and I don't know if they ever found it or not. But by the end of the night, the poor guy felt so obligated to do a promo where he's covered in blood that he's like punching himself in the forehead to get it, and like, I mean, dedication to it.
But this is this is stuff that I could all really like. I can, you know, definitely. I've been there. I've got scars all over my body because of the stupidity of professional wrestling.
The finish of your match that we watched was you suplexing Cannonball onto a bunch of sliced open cans of soda.
Yes.
And then
he was
finishing.
bleeding the minute into the match.
Covered in tacks.
Yeah, well, that was, and what was kind of great about that was you guys hit each other with the bats covered in tacks at the beginning. You see all the fucking tacks in your heads and the blood, and you didn't even have to do that much from that point because you're already fucked up, and now everything that you do from that point in the match, you're doing while bleeding out of the head with tacks stuck in your head. And then, of course, ramping it up towards, you know, later in the match made it even more dramatic.
Pulling the curtain back real quickly. Jeff and I are sitting in the back talking about this match, and he's making a blade for himself. And he goes, do you have a blade? I go, no. He's like, oh, you want me to make you one? I go, let's try and bust me hard way with some of these things. If not, just, you know, come at me with something. And then, of course, what is it, 10 seconds into the match, and
You didn't need to do it yourself. That's,
Right, so I was just like, I don't...
Good stuff. So what was the finish? Because now I can't even remember. What was the finish? Right, Dustin Rhodes comes in.
Okay, so Dustin Rhodes.
Oh, Dustin Rhodes is where I took the half star off. Unmotivated Dustin Rhodes is the fucking worst. This is not me knocking Dustin. This is not me knocking Dustin Rhodes or Goldust. Amazing performer, one of a kind.
Still got to do the Goldust episode.
Specifically when he's not motivated, it's painful.
So he brings in, he jumps Funk and pile drives him on a chair. The pile driver was actually excellent, I thought.
Yeah, that one was good.
Then he goes to the second rope with the chair, and they set up a spot which didn't quite come off, I think, the way they wanted to, where, but it was clever. Dustin comes off the second rope into Funk's boot, and that knocks him on top of the ladder, which comes up like a seesaw into Norman Smiley on the outside.
Terribly, though. Then, just absolutely awfully.
Yeah. Yeah, it barely hits him. It like kind of.
I mean, we've seen the havoc that can be wreaked if that spot goes as planned. The time it exploded Joey Mercury's face on live TV.
That's true.
Right,
to this day, if anybody ever tries a spot like that and I see it, like I can't think of anything, but you probably should do a different spot. Joey Mercury was never the same.
I don't know if that was supposed to be the finish by itself and Funk ad-libbed the end, but the end was great where he just picks up the ladder to like the full arm's length above his head and just drops it out of the ring onto Smiley and then goes out. And then when he pins him, he holds on to the ladder for leverage.
Yeah, again, this is the chaos that you get from a Terry Funk match. Like, you don't know what's going to be next. I mean, I'm sure, you know, everyone's fine on the inside of it, but like as a fan watching this, it's just, what am I going to see this guy do next? He's throwing soda cans. He's using the fire extinguisher. Like, what is Terry going to do next?
At one point, Norman Smiley's
exactly
hanging on a pipe. But...
And then 56-year-old Terry Funk is the WCW Hardcore Champion. And I mean, knowing WCW, he lost it on fucking
Right, I was about to say,
whatever.
he probably lost it some days later to like Ralphus or something.
Counting vacancies, the WCW champion, like the World Championship in 2000, changes hands. I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head. I believe it's in the vicinity of 24 times over the course of the 1 year.
That checks out.
It was way too high of a number. Whatever number it was too high of a number.
Well, that's the tragedy of late-stage WCW. Individual segments are brilliant, but then you try and watch it as a narrative, and it's just sad. It's like they can't really string anything together.
Right. Like, again, we came from Hogan getting arrested, which, this is how I look at it as, like, a fan, as someone who's, like, involved in things. A wrestler, like, your biggest draw getting arrested, that was a 25-minute segment on Raw with Austin, and it was a big production, and the cameras were in there, and the fans were all about it. And then you switch sides and go to WCW. One of your biggest draws is being carted off in handcuffs, and that's a 3-minute segment that is cut off by a comedy Three Stooges match between Terry Funk and Norman Smiley.
So, since I looked it up, Funk actually held the title for over a month.
That's a big old reign in WCW.
Lost it to Shane Douglas on May 22nd on Nitro, then won it back from Shane Douglas the next day on Thunder. Held it for another 2 weeks, won it again in December, and held it for almost another month before it was deactivated. So, yeah. I'd like to see more Terry Funk WCW year 2000 hardcore matches.
Oh, Ben, you should just watch WCW 2000 if you've never really seen it. Like, it's amusing as hell.
I'll say there's another hardcore match between Terry and Norman Smiley that I think is like heads and tails above this one, where Norman is dressed not as a baseball catcher, but as a
Chris
football
Candido.
player in this match. Ralphus gets involved in that one. Try and find that one. And the other great Terry Funk match from this era is Terry versus Chris Candido, where they wrestle and they're driving. Right, they drive and into like an actual ranch, like they're in the back of a pickup truck and they're fighting, and they drive off to a ranch and they go into a horse's stable. Terry Funk drops the pile driver on Chris Candido in a horse stable with a live horse there. The horse gets spooked, kicks back and hits Terry Funk. You see Candido has his life flash before him.
I have to see this now.
Terry Funk, being the maniac he is, stands up after getting kicked by a horse and goes, "You fucking horse, I'll kick your ass too," and goes back.
Oh, absolutely brilliant.
Oh, you don't want to fuck with horses. They can be thousands of pounds.
Terry Funk is where that tough.
Terry Funk probably figured, well, what if I'm gonna die getting mauled, getting beat to death by a horse? That's how I go.
Gonna naturally plug our Patreon. You know, you mentioned Chris Candido in one of the most recent premium episodes, and we're still doing a premium episode every single week. It's now me and Ben and sometimes Katie and any of our friends watching whatever the hell we want, and it's very amusing. So that's a $5 tier.
Yeah, we watched an IWA Mid-South show.
Yeah, we watched an IWA Mid-South show on IWTV.
Oh, so jealous.
Yeah, well, IWTV is great, of course, and like our premium episodes are a little more freeform. There are a bunch of them from earlier with Evan, but now we're being very careful of how we use Evan. Anyway, my point is, we watched an IWA... We watched an IWA Mid-South show from 2005. We were looking through or 2004 rather, and we were looking through the matches. We saw a bunch of guys that we liked on a card because we were big Ring of Honor fans at the time. And we watched this show, and honestly, most of the guys that at the time were having great banger matches in Ring of Honor were kind of phoning it in. But you know who wasn't phoning it in for the 55 people at the place IWA Mid-South was running? Chris Candido. Chris Candido showed up, and he was the biggest star we've ever seen, and his whole act was brilliant, and every night he delivered like it was the best match you're gonna see that night. And I think
Doc and I ever went to in 2004 was USA Pro Wrestling at the Amazura Ballroom. And
in Queens,
yeah,
that was a short USA Pro show.
Like Cruel died shortly after that.
It was I think I remember you both telling me it was a 6 hour or some ridiculous number of match show with one ref.
Right, Ref Hansen did the whole show for about five and a half hours.
Ref Hansen.
Yeah, that was a short show.
No, I was gonna say, do we have any thoughts to wrap up?
I have one more thought. Which is that I really enjoyed all this stuff. I mean, Terry Funk is awesome. Getting a little bit of deathmatch wrestling that I don't see very often was very cool and was sort of refreshing in a current wrestling landscape, at least mainstream wrestling landscape, that is just kind of bloodless, literally and figuratively, and banal a lot of the time. To see a real fucking wild man character like Terry Funk, and to see people really push things to the limit, both theatrically and in terms of
I think for me it's fun. If anybody catches my style and has seen my matches, I model so much of what I do after Terry, because I mean, for all the reasons that you just said, is that he's a real wild man and crazy. You don't know what you're going to expect. You don't know what you're going to get. And that was always appealing to me. And I don't know, maybe there's a whole bunch more people that it appeals to. Those are the people that I would like to go out there and market my style to.
Well, we could do several episodes in a row on Terry Funk. We won't, but I'm probably going to be looking him up on YouTube. I'll go. I don't want to be like, oh, I got to see all this Terry Funk, but I'm probably going to go on a Terry Funk binge because he adds so much to every match he's in, no matter who the opponent is. And like Norman Smiley, by the way, in that match we watched, doing all that goofy stuff. Norman Smiley could wrestle any style. He was in WCW and was like, oh, this place is a fucking clown show? Well, I'm going to be a fucking clown. And he became a big star by reading the room properly.
He's still under contract in the E, right?
He's a trainer.
Like behind the scenes
Major
in NXT.
trainer.
Yeah.
He's one of the major trainers in NXT.
Who a lot of current wrestlers attribute their success in developing their characters and their ring psychology to. Big time.
Yeah, I guess before we wrap it up, Logan, I know you're doing a million things. You want to plug all your pluggables?
Let's make it happen. Cool. So you can check me out on all social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at King of Chaos NYC. You could check out my podcast, the Year One Wrestling Podcast, where we have guests on talk about their first year in professional wrestling and all the trials and tribulations that comes along with that. You can find that on all social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Year One Pod. And also, if you would like to help support me financially, throw some dollars in my pocket, get some cool stuff based out of it, you can do that in one of two ways. The first being my Pro Wrestling Tees store. That's prowrestlingtees.com/King of Chaos NYC. And my online merch table. That is kingofchaosnyc.bigcartel.com. I got new merch coming out. They're boxer shorts. No other wrestler has boxer shorts except for your boy here. So if you want some boxer shorts with my likeness on them, check that website out. They're on pre-order as we speak.
No, I was my metal yoga teacher wanted merch ideas, and
Everybody, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for joining me on the journey, trying to delve deeper into wrestling. This has been Contesting Wrestling.
Peace.
Peace, everybody.
We love you.